I'm back. Happy New Year to you. Welcome. It is Erickson here across the United States of America, across the fruited plain with you, dear listeners. I have missed you. I have missed you badly. I'm glad to be back with you. The phone number, if you'd like to be on the program, although hold off on the phone calls if you don't mind, this first hour, 877-973-7425. We just got so much to cover. I want to take your phone calls, but let me just digest the news with you first. And I need to do a programming note. For those of you who are longtime listeners here, we are on more than double the number of stations today than we are when I left the air in December. Massive number of stations across the entire state of Mississippi, Anchorage, Alaska, Watertown, New York, Corvallis, Oregon, Salem, Oregon, so much more. We're now on weekdays in Las Vegas, and we got a lot of new stations. We added something like 25 stations in the last 2 weeks for today. So for those of you nationwide who've never heard me before, I am Erickson. That is my real name. This is my show. I was a lawyer. I was an elected official, a Republican. I worked on CNN and Fox News for a number of years, guest hosted for Rush Limbaugh, Herman Cain, Neil Bortz, was evening drive times in Atlanta for a long time after Rush Limbaugh passed away. I moved nationally noon to 3 into his slot. He was my mentor, got me into radio. I was a friend of his before I was ever in radio, and he got me into radio in large part by fibbing as to my qualifications to be on radio. Was a dear friend and mentor. And here I am now with you on your stations nationwide. So thanks for being with me. Let's get to the news. I want to cover two things very quickly and then one in depth. Today is January 6th for those who celebrate. Happy January 6th. Now, if my flippancy offends you, that's on you. That's not on me. I have a long record of consistency on talking about January 6th in that it was a riot. It was not an insurrection. It was an incursion into the Capitol, and it was bad. January 6th is nothing to celebrate or, frankly, to be flippant about. However, the left, including members of the media and the Democratic Party, have insisted that it is so bad, the pushback naturally has been to downplay it. You shouldn't downplay January 6th. It wasn't a good look. It wasn't a good day. People inflamed over the outcome of the election in 2020 stormed into the U.S. Capitol, not in an insurrection, not in an attempted coup, but they were convinced they were saving the country from what they thought was a coup. Some very innocent people wound up going to jail because they saw people go into the Capitol and they themselves wandered in oblivious. When I was a kid, you used to be able to wander into the Capitol, and I don't think it's a coincidence that a bunch of geriatric people wandered into the Capitol and wound up getting arrested because they saw people going into the Capitol, and they themselves knew as growing up before 9/11, you could just walk into the U.S. Capitol. I know. I got engaged there. You could just wander in. There were also some malcontented souls, a lot of people fanning the flames, a lot of lies said that got people to go into the Capitol. It wasn't a good day. It was also not the worst day in American history. 9/11, Pearl Harbor, and a whole lot of other days take precedence, and there was this whole thing called the American Civil War. As much as people in Trump's corner want to dismiss it altogether, people in the media want to give it disproportionate attention. I have now given it enough attention. Bad day. Don't do it again. A lot of people got prosecuted in ways the people who burned down Kenosha, Wisconsin and Washington, D.C. in left-wing riots never got prosecuted. There was a double standard in the prosecutions. Those days caused more damage, more insurance coverage, more cost to businesses and buildings than what happened on January 6th. But God forbid we should point that out. Second, Jimmy Carter is dead. I have nothing good to say about Jimmy Carter. There's not a whole lot to say for me to linger. I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but I am going to say this as everybody trots out these wonderful stories about Jimmy Carter. I have a lot of stories about Jimmy Carter, including from 3 former presidents of the United States, some Democrat, some Republican. Not a single one of the stories is good. A lot of men have hard shells and soft hearts. Jimmy Carter had a soft shell and a hard heart, And all the people who have great stories about Jimmy Carter were on camera, and all the people who have the bad stories about Jimmy Carter were not seen within the camera frame. And those stories matter most. When the camera was turned off, Jimmy Carter was not a great guy, and I'm actually in the camp that believes Jimmy Carter was a worse former president than he was president. He was a mediocre president of the United States and actually did some things in terms of deregulation and getting the government out of people's lives that were good. As a former president, Jimmy Carter never met an enemy of the United States he did not want to normalize, including Hamas. He used his bully pulpit as a former president to make himself look good while dragging the United States through the mud and compromising and trying to satisfy our enemies instead of being an actual patriot of the United States. I have nothing good to say about the man, and I think it's very notable that every single president of the United States, other than Joe Biden, since Jimmy Carter left office, never had anything nice to say about the man. One former Democratic president once told me that he was used to lying as a politician, and he would save his best lies for after Jimmy Carter died so he could tell people how good he was. That should say something striking. Another former president told me he used to always wonder why presidents didn't care for Jimmy Carter until he became a president, and there is a reason that Jimmy Carter always stood off to the side of the other presidents. And another former president, there's a very famous story I know about him. He would never call Jimmy Carter by his name, and I can't say the name he would have called Jimmy Carter on the radio, and it was so common for him to call Jimmy Carter that once a friend of mine encountered the man's wife, and when she found out that he had met her husband and knew where my friend had come from, she asked him, had the president mentioned the blankety blank that I can't say. I have nothing good to say, so we'll just move on. But a family has lost a father and a grandfather, and they loved him, and you should pray for them. They are in mourning for someone they dearly love, whether I cared for the man or not. The big story to start this day with is what happened in New Orleans and Las Vegas. And I want to dwell a little bit on this, and I don't mean to be insulting out of the gate. It's my first day back from Christmas. Yesterday was the last day of Christmas. Today's Epiphany. We're into the new year. I don't want to be insulting, so let me be very diplomatic here. There are some people on the right who are fixated with the man in Las Vegas who killed himself. I unfortunately saw the video of him blowing his brains out in the Tesla. He ignited the explosion of the Tesla and then shot himself in the head. And it was all caught on security camera footage. And it was gory and awful, and you should not watch it. I wish I could get it out of my head. There are a lot of people who say it's an op. People love to use the word op. I don't know that they even know what they mean when they say op these days, but people are saying it. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories. The guy believed a lot of things, elevated by some fringe podcast that are trying to go mainstream, that are putting in special operators and members of the military to spread their wild conspiracy theories as if they're actual, normal, ordinary things, and they're not. Many of it's made up. People's trust are being abused. This guy seems to have had his trust abused and began to believe a lot of crazy things. Here's my point in saying it this way. There are a lot of people who wish to focus on the soldier who killed himself in Las Vegas and get you to focus on the soldier who killed himself in Las Vegas and to seed the idea that it's a crazy conspiracy, that it's an op, that it's the government did it, that they were trying to send a message to Trump. All these crazy conspiracy theories have come out. You know what the op is, if there's an op? It's to distract you from what happened in New Orleans. And that's the serious story. The guy in Las Vegas, yeah, I do believe, based on the record, information, his ramblings, his writings, and his appearances across social media, that he had PTSD, had serious mental issues that he was grappling with, and decided to dramatically kill himself. And the people who wish to focus on that and dig their heels in on Las Vegas have decided instead to distract themselves from the far more disturbing story that an American citizen who served in the Army as a human resource officer radicalized himself towards ISIS with a mosque near his home and an imam near his home who preached death to the Jews. And this man went to New Orleans, pledging his life to ISIS, and tried to kill as many people as possible and planted explosives around New Orleans. In the rush to get the story out as quickly as possible, the FBI, just as they have done repeatedly in the past, made lots of mistakes, seeding the idea that he was not working alone, that it was a major operation, that people were involved, and then they had to walk it all back, which gave conspiracy theorists the fuel to think the FBI was covering something up, when what we know is that this man planted explosives around the French Quarter in New Orleans at a high-profile event and then got into a rented Ford F-150 Lightning and decided to kill as many people as possible. He was radicalized, pledged his life to ISIS, and what is the most remarkable detail in the entirety of this is that the FBI has spent inordinate resources on finding the people who participated in the riots of January 6th and finding the people who showed up at abortion clinics to pray and finding any conservative in America who said anything not nice about Joe Biden. And this guy had his entire writings online for the entire public to see, and he was never on a watch list. Grandmama who is in a wheelchair who prays at the abortion clinic gets on the FBI watch list and gets arrested, and this guy is literally online pledging his life to ISIS, and the FBI is more concerned about arresting the critics of Joe Biden than arresting the enemies of America. That, my friends, is why you should not distract yourself by the crazy man in Las Vegas. You should pay attention to the terrorist in New Orleans who killed 15 people and told everybody online what he wanted to do, but the FBI was too busy finding cell phone data for January 6th rioters, so they couldn't be bothered to stop the terrorist. We got a real problem here. And when the Trump administration comes in, they need to do a serious deep dive into what's going on at Fort Bragg. I guess they're calling it Fort Liberty right now. They're going to move it back to Fort Bragg. It is Fort Bragg. Nobody knows where Fort Liberty is. But this guy was there. The guy from Las Vegas spent time there. And a number of other extremists have spent time at Fort Bragg. I got no idea. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's in the water there. But it's something that should be looked into, and this guy's mental health issues. He divorced his wife. His wife had to get a court order to keep him away from his children. As he descends, he's left the Army now, a human resource officer. How about that? Into DEI, I'm sure. He descends into madness, probably poisoned by the DEI ideology, into hating America. Speculation on my part. He descends into paranoia, converts to Islam, becomes radicalized by a local mosque. By the way, we've got video of the imam at the mosque that he went to, and it was all death to the Jews all the time, some really awful stuff that this guy was saying in the pulpit at the mosque. And this guy got radicalized, pledged his life to ISIS. It was all online. You could see the descent. His family warned people that there was something not right about the guy. And somehow the grandmother in the wheelchair at the abortion clinic got on the FBI radar, but not this guy. There's something profoundly wrong at the FBI. There's also something profoundly wrong in the culture of DEI in this country where people can be turned to hate the greatest country on planet Earth. That people can feel victimized in such a way that they want to kill as many people as possible. We're not talking enough about mental health, and that's the other key tie-in to this and what happened in Las Vegas is two people struggling seriously with mental illness. And notice, whether it's a school shooting, whether it's the guy in Las Vegas, whether it's the guy in New Orleans, no one wants to talk about the mental health issues. Every single time a young white kid with an AR-15 goes into a school and shoots it up, we got to have the gun control conversation. We can't have the mental health conversation. Now we've got a terrorist who converts to ISIS, mentally self-destructs, and we can't have a conversation about that or the spiritual issue involved. We have a spiritual problem in this country that's polluted a cultural problem in this country, that's polluted a political problem in this country. We don't have a political problem in this country. We've got broken people in this country who are descending into madness, converting to ISIS and trying to kill a bunch of Americans. And somehow they never wind up on the FBI radar. But you say something bad about the Democrats, God help you. We got problems, people. We got problems. Don't be distracted. The president gave out the Presidential Medal of Freedom. You know, a lot of people are focused on George Soros, and George Soros is relevant to focus on. Even the New York Times said basically it's an admission the Democrats have been financed by George Soros. Biden came up with some highfalutin reason, the Open Society Foundation, but that's not really it. George Soros is one of those unique people who actually does have blood on his hands. Joe Biden does, and George Soros does. No, I'm not talking about the Nazi stuff. I actually do think that's a slander on George Soros, to be honest with you. He was a kid and was basically told, be a Nazi or die. I mean, if you were a kid at that time, you probably would do the same thing. I try to be a little bit understanding on that one. But George Soros has funded progressive district attorneys around the country who have sparked a crime wave and gotten people killed. And that's a direct result of George Soros' policies, and Joe Biden is awarding him a Medal of Freedom. What's nobody noticed was Tim Gill also got it. Tim Gill is a major radical gay rights activist in this country, and David Rubenstein as well, who's a billionaire who supports tax breaks for billionaires. Nobody wanted to pay attention to them. Now, I got to tell you about Old Glory Bank, y'all. My bank. Y'all, over Christmas break, I got to tell you, Old Glory was able to do me a solid. They're so good in their operations. I had to move some money from one checking account to another. I had to move money out of Old Glory and into another one. I had made a mistake and was able to get the money. I had a bank account. And in fact, one of the reasons I wanted to get rid of that bank and I moved to Old Glory is that I could send in a transfer request, and it could take a week to get it done. Old Glory snap your fingers. They get it done. They're so good. They can be your bank. They do mortgages. They do checking accounts, savings accounts. They do car loans, lines of equity, CDs, you name it. And businesses, if you're a business and you need a great bank that's not going to cancel you, Old Glory Bank can be your bank. OldGloryBank.com. OldGloryBank.com. It really is my bank. I love them. They can be your bank. OldGloryBank.com. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply. Go to OldGloryBank.com today. You know one of the great things about being a dead Republican? If you are a dead Republican, the American media lionizes you, heralds you as the greatest thing since sliced bread, and for years they vilified you. Now you're dead, and they use you as a way to say the current guy is terrible. It's like I have told Donald Trump, I've literally told Donald Trump this, that when he dies, they'll all say nice things about him to put down whoever replaces him. It's true, though. I mean, they vilified Ronald Reagan until Reagan died, and then suddenly, if only George W. Bush were as good as Ronald Reagan. When Donald Trump comes along, if only Donald Trump was as good as John McCain or Mitt Romney or George Bush or Ronald Reagan. When the next guy comes along and Donald Trump is dead, that Donald Trump, he was just such a funny little huckster. We wish he was around. This guy is Hitler. Well, they're doing it now with J. Edgar Hoover. That's right, J. Edgar Hoover, the New Yorker, which vilified J. Edgar Hoover. The New Yorker has a long and well-documented history of making J. Edgar Hoover the worst possible human being to ever live, including Adolf Hitler. Now ran an entire piece the other day that Kash Patel is so bad, J. Edgar Hoover's got to be rolling over in his grave. J. Edgar Hoover was nothing compared to Kash Patel. J. Edgar Hoover had no desire to politicize the FBI in the way Kash Patel would. J. Edgar Hoover may have been bad, but he wasn't as bad as Kash Patel. J. Edgar Hoover may have used the FBI to abuse his position of trust, but didn't do so for any president, and Kash Patel would just hump Donald Trump's leg. It is remarkable and predictable how when a guy the media hates dies, that person's legacy is completely rebuilt and pristine so they can beat up on the living guy. It is so predictable. To see the New Yorker do it to J. Edgar Hoover so that they could attack Kash Patel is hilarious. And the fact that the FBI couldn't pick up on a terrorist converted to ISIS and Islam in the United States and put it on social media and killed people in New Orleans, they couldn't even put him on their radar. It's why Kash Patel deserves the job. He needs to get in there and clean house. There was a really disturbing story that came out of the Wall Street Journal while we were all on vacation. And I suspect a lot of people missed it, and I need to bring you up to speed because of just how troubling it is. Another failure on the Biden administration's watch. And this one may be the worst failure that we have potentially seen. It is, well, bad. Jake Sullivan had this meeting with executives in, let me just read you directly from the Wall Street Journal. The message from President Biden's national security advisor was startling. Chinese hackers had gained the ability to shut down dozens of U.S. ports, power grids, and other infrastructure targets at will, Jake Sullivan told telecommunications and technology executives at a secret meeting at the White House in the fall of 2023, according to people familiar with it. The attack could threaten lives, and the government needed the company's help to root out the intruders. What no one at the briefing knew, including Jake Sullivan, Chinese hackers were already working their way deep into U.S. telecom networks, too. The two massive hacking operations have upended the West's understanding of what Beijing wants, while revealing the astonishing skill level and stealth of its keyboard warriors, once seen as the cyber equivalent of noisy, drunken burglars. China's hackers were once thought to be interested chiefly in business secrets and huge sets of private consumer data. But the latest hacks made clear they're now soldiers on the front lines of potential geopolitical conflict between the U.S. and China, in which cyber warfare tools are expected to be powerful weapons. That's pretty alarming. Senior officials described the Chinese hacking operation in unusually blunt terms as part of an evolving and increasingly worrisome campaign by Beijing to get a foothold in U.S. computer networks, responsible for everything from safe drinking water to aviation traffic, so it could detonate at a moment's notice damaging cyber attacks during a future conflict, including over Taiwan. The government claims it has disrupted this hacking operation. They wanted to infect routers. Let me explain to you first the extent of this. We in this country, and it's danced around a lot by people on the right because of all of our shared concerns over immigration, but we have a declining population in the country. One of the reasons that Democrats want mass immigration is because they do see this. And it is, by the way, a problem. We will, in the next 25 years, have fewer and fewer people in this country. So one of the ways companies have responded to this demographic inevitability, unless people start having kids again, is the efficiencies of the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things was a term that came about in the early 2000s where the Internet would be in everything. So, for example, I got an ice maker at my house. It's one of those GE Nugget ice makers, not the countertop, but it's the under-counter one. And it has Wi-Fi connected to it. And so I get an alert on my phone if the filter needs to be changed. I have friends who have Wi-Fi enabled refrigerators. I don't know why the heck anyone needs a Wi-Fi enabled refrigerator. It's just one more thing to break. I didn't need a Wi-Fi connected ice maker. I just couldn't buy one without it. My preference is to buy things that are not connected to the internet. Not because I'm afraid about the Chinese hackers, but because it's just another component that's going to eventually break, and someone somewhere is going to manufacture it in a way that I can't use the machine without fixing it. I don't want it. But companies, because of the population situation and other efficiency issues, have been connecting all of their devices to the internet so they can be run over the internet without ever having to be in person. So power plants and water utilities have connected their systems to the internet, and through the internet they can be monitored by outside entities and by engineers that don't have to be on site, and the Chinese hackers found their way in. Tell you my favorite Internet of Things device. It's the only one I really liked. I have a Rectech. Rectech is a pellet grill. I love my Rectech. If you got a Traeger, you should upgrade to the Rectech. It's a better build quality. And one of the coolest things about my Rectech is that I could decide, you know what, I think I want to use it this afternoon, and I could, from my office, turn it on with my phone remotely over the internet. And I did a software update, and unbeknownst to me, the software update canceled the ability to do that, and it really makes me mad. And I did finally complain. I was like, guys, why can't I turn on my RecTech over the internet anymore? Government regulators, fire hazard, liability. We can't allow you to have fun and nice things anymore. I can turn it off and monitor it on my phone, but I can't turn it on my phone anymore, thanks to Uncle Sam. Aggravates me to no end. It's not their fault. It's the lawyers and Uncle Sam. Nonetheless, the Internet of Things, it has some usefulness, but here's the thing. The Chinese can hack all this stuff. And it turns out the Chinese have been hacking into our water supply system. Now, this is where it gets critical and tricky for you and me. A lot of water companies in this country allow outside monitoring and regulation of their systems. So if you need to add or reduce the fluoride in the water, I picked the controversial one first, or the chlorine in the water, or other chemicals in the water, it can be done remotely. So the Chinese hackers could alter the chemical composition of your water and kill you and everybody in your community by hacking into the system and getting readily accessible chemicals to be added to the water at hazardous rates without anyone knowing until they started dying. The Chinese hackers infiltrated the power grid in parts of the country so they could overload the reactor core. They could shut down the power in critical areas. They even hacked in to the critical air infrastructure so they could get planes to collide or keep runways grounded so planes couldn't take off. That's how infested they were. And while all of that was happening, they were sneaking into our telephone system as well. And inside our telephone system, they started monitoring all of our phone calls. Now you're thinking you're no one of importance. Good for you having that level of humility. Doesn't matter. China has your phone calls and text messages. The only text messages China can't get are the ones from Apple devices to Apple devices. You know the blue bubbles? Everybody talks about the blue bubbles and the green bubbles. If you're on an Apple device and you're sending to an Apple device, you're using a proprietary system from Apple called iMessage, and China can't get those messages. China can't get the text messages on Signal app, and China can't get the text messages on WhatsApp. But if you send just a regular text message over SMS, like most cell phones have and all the Android devices have, China's got all your text messages. Now, you're right. They don't care about you. But members of Congress, local elected officials, state officials, let's say, hypothetically speaking, local official has a porn habit and sent some nudie pictures to somebody. Well, China's got it. Great blackmail when China comes calling, wanting to negotiate a land purchase in their community or favorable terms for one of these Chinese businesses. Hey, look at all the text messages you sent that we have or that you received that we'd be ashamed if this got out there. If they've got them now. They've got them. And we can't get them out. The routers they used were from Cisco and Netgear. They were vulnerable because they reached into life status. They were no longer receiving routine security updates. And the infected routers weren't necessarily linked to critical infrastructure networks the hackers targeted, but were nodes used to conceal their malicious activity. So they went into outdated routers. They bypassed security. They got into the systems. And they've systematically begun compromising our FAA, our systems for airplanes, our power grid, our water supply, our telecom networks, everything. During the Biden administration. And the Biden administration doesn't completely know how to get them out. Now, this again from the Wall Street Journal. Officials were able to delete the botnet from the routers and sever their connection with the hackers while installing code to prevent reinfection. Individual owners, however, weren't notified in advance. Not only that, in the telecommunications case, the U.S. government has been flummoxed in how to remove the Chinese from the system, and they've begun to advise political entities in this country, including individuals and organizations, to stop communicating on cell phones. This is the Biden administration, not at work, but in gross incompetence. China, of course, denies all of this. You won't be surprised. By the way, while all of that was going on, guess what? There's a new virus spreading in China. Sound familiar? Except this one doesn't go after the middle-aged and the overweight. It goes after kids. 5 years after COVID. It's human metapneumovirus, HMPV. Coughs and fevers can turn into bronchitis or pneumonia. It's all over China. Hospitals are being overwhelmed. The country supposedly is seeing overwhelmed crematoriums and funeral homes. Neighborhoods are being shut down. Neighboring countries are shutting down their border with China. Right here, right now, same time that COVID happened 5 years ago, another virus is spreading in China, and the Chinese are lying to everyone about it. This one targets your children, not you. China is a disaster, and they wish to spread that disaster to the rest of us as well. And the Biden administration has a dementia patient in charge who can't lead. I got to tell you, by the way, side note before I get out of here, one of the other stories that came out is about Afghanistan. You know, Jake Sullivan, I'm not a Jake Sullivan fan. He's the National Security Advisor. But Jake Sullivan offered to resign after the Afghanistan debacle. He is the only person in the administration who recognized it was a disaster. And Joe Biden, of course, told him not to resign. What I find really interesting about that situation, though, is that Jake Sullivan, despite my disagreements with him and concerns about him, had the character to go to the president and say, I'm resigning for this, even though Biden told him not to, refused to accept it. Lloyd Austin did not. Anthony Blinken did not. General Milley did not. None of the people who actually had command authority for the situation offered to resign. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, did. That speaks to his character, whether I like him or not. And it speaks loudly that none of the rest of them chose to even offer their resignations. This administration has been a national security disaster. The world, right before Christmas, was obsessed with the drones in New Jersey. And I told you, your host, I don't like to be salacious if there's no reason to be. None of that stuff. I told you, I did not think it was a coincidence. My buddy Ben Dominich at The Spectator pointed it out, that in 2023, an aerospace engineering park announced it had signed a contract with the DoD to start developing and testing drones, and they expected to begin testing those drones around November of 2024 in a flight corridor from New Jersey over Pennsylvania to the Dover, Delaware Air Force Base. Guess what? Turns out, weirdly enough, so the FAA issued an order and said no drones allowed in the skies over New Jersey. And all the drones went away. Now, let me just ask you, you're logical people. I hope some of you become very emotional these days, but logic. So the FAA says no drones allowed. And they all went away. Do you believe that China and Russia and Iran would care about an FAA order? All the drones magically disappeared when the FAA said no drones. And when the FAA released the order, guess what? The drones came back. According to the Department of Defense, there were over 5,000 identified encounters with drones. And of those over 5,000 identified encounters, every single one can be targeted to a specific plane, helicopter, or known drone in the skies, except for 100. And those they believe were amateurs having a field day. The drones over Virginia, however, continue to be unexplained. Now, I got to tell you about Swiss America. Before I get out of here, the secret war on cash has been happening. For those of you new to this, let me explain to you. Swiss America has been the trusted leader in precious metals for 40 years. They've been warning people about a secret war on cash where the government is trying to implement tactics in currency so that though you think you're spending anonymously, you're not. The government's still tracking you. And by the way, it extends to digital currencies. Swiss America has been rated A+ by the Better Business Bureau, and they can educate you on protecting your assets in this report. It takes less than 15 minutes to read. You can get the report completely for free. All you do is call or text my name, Erick, E-R-I-C-K, E-R-I-C-K. Call or text my name to 800-289-2646. Remember, the secret war on cash is spreading daily, but you can get the report completely free. You just mention Erick, E-R-I-C-K. Call or text 800-289-2646. That's 800-289-2646. Message and data rates may apply. Yeah, the cop to the environment is, look, Chad, I appreciate the phone call and Happy New Year to you. The Biden on the way out the door, and let's be clear here. Joe Biden is not doing any of these things. We say Joe Biden because he's the president, but Joe Biden is a dementia patient who they spend half the time mopping the drool out of the side of his chin. It is the progressives in the White House who are running things. And I personally, this is Erick Erickson. This is not lawyer Erick Erickson. This is just emotional, mad at all of this Erick Erickson. Thinks that the Trump administration could come in and say, listen, the predecessor did not have the mental faculties to make these decisions, and they were done in his name by other people, and therefore they're being undone because he was a dementia patient when we didn't have the capacity to act, so they didn't have the capacity to act. Personally, that's what I would do. I think it would be thrown out by courts, but that should be his first argument, is like, the dude lacks the capacity, the mental capacity to do this. We should not be bound by these things. What Biden is trying to do, and they're very open about it, is quote-unquote guardrails. They want to put up guardrails to stop Donald Trump, or at least to Biden. There's only so much they can do. So let's take this a couple steps forward. So Biden used the Continental Shelf Act of 1983 to bind Donald Trump to prohibit offshore drilling in those areas for national security and environmental reasons. For Trump to undo it himself will take a regulatory review of the Department of Energy and the Department of Interior working together in tandem, taking public comments and building out a rule that will open the land back. That'll take at least 2 years to do. Then Donald Trump is a lame duck. He's only got 2 years left. As I mentioned earlier, the oil market is a futures market. And so we price in a barrel of oil today based on the future expectation of more oil. And those companies oftentimes take 20 years to make their money back. So what energy company is going to want to try to invest in that area in 2 years, knowing Trump's only got 2 years left and a Democrat could come in 4 years and shut it all down again? What company wants to take that risk? None of them do. So Trump does need to get Congress to act, and frankly, they can use reconciliation. They've had a pattern in the past of expanding drilling territory in the country in reconciliation to raise revenue for the federal government. They can do it again, and they should. Now, I got to switch gears here. Because there's something else we need to talk about here. This is another story that happened while we were gone. You know what? For the sensitivities of it, if you've got children, we're about to talk about a sensitive subject. And I want to tread a little cautiously on this. I'm not going to dive deep, just so you know. I'm not going to dive super deep in it. But if you've got children, just so you understand, we're about to talk about a sensitive subject. So it is your choice. 3, 2, 1. On the subway in New York City 2 weeks ago, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, held a press conference. And she declared that for the first time in quite a while, thanks to law enforcement efforts, the subway in New York City was safe to ride again. This came on the heels of the Daniel Penny trial, where he was found not guilty by a jury and out of prison after he had to detain and incapacitate a madman trying to harm other people on the subway. That man died in police care, and Penny was charged with his murder, even though the guy was alive when the police got there. Kathy Hochul declared 2 weeks ago the subway in New York was safe again. While the press conference was happening in another subway stop, a woman who had fallen asleep on a subway car was burned alive by an illegal alien who stood there and fanned the flames as this woman awoke to the horror of her flesh burning, screamed until she died. And the citizens of New York watched and did nothing. And if you watch the security camera footage, you'll see more than one police officer walk by. This woman was burned alive on the subway at the same time Kathy Hochul was telling people it was safe to be on the subways. This woman was burned alive on the subway by an illegal alien from Guatemala who the Biden administration let back into the country after the Trump administration had deported the guy. Burned alive, and the people of New York did nothing. And who could blame them because of what happened to Daniel Penny? Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, signaled to all New Yorkers and everyone, if you try to save your fellow human being on the subways of New York and something happens, you're going to be charged. At the same time this happened, 2 other people were stabbed to death on the subway. While Kathy, again, for the stage, you need to understand this in your head. Kathy Hochul is having a press conference to tell people the subways of New York are safe. A woman is burned alive in one subway car, and people are stabbed to death in 2 subway stations while Kathy Hochul is talking at her press conference. A few days later, a young man was in the subway in New York City waiting for his subway. And as the train approached, a homeless man shoved the young man in front of the train, critically injuring him. He survived. I don't know how he survived. I saw that video. I don't know how he survived. This is wild to me. And the people of New York did nothing. The people of New York are being trained to do nothing. The people of New York are being told if you do anything, you're going to be in trouble. The top of the next hour, I'm going to bring you up to speed on what's happened in Rotherham, England. Rape gangs. And the citizens and the police did nothing because they didn't want to inflame tensions. They wanted to believe they had a multicultural society. What they had were rape gangs of Muslim men raping mostly white girls, some of whom were so badly gang raped their pelvises were broken in the process. I can tie that to the good people of New York standing around watching a woman turn into flambe and doing nothing to stop it because the government has told them they'll be punished if they try to be the Good Samaritan. Something is profoundly wrong in our culture and our society, and it's a spiritual problem, by the way. It is a spiritual problem. And government can't correct a spiritual problem. Only the church can. And there are too many people in the church who are too involved in politics to speak truthfully, forcefully, purely for salvation. They've muddied themselves in politics of the left and the right. They're not just speaking truth anymore. Some of them are too scared to. Some of them are too distracted to. Some of them can't be bothered We got spiritual problems around the country right now. We got people in New York being burned alive by illegal aliens, and we got a bunch of people out there demanding that we treat illegal aliens as one of us. We're supposed to love our neighbor. You know, our neighbor was burned alive by an illegal immigrant on a subway in New York, and you're going to lecture me about fidelity towards illegal immigration? We got real problems. But New York, y'all, New York has some of the worst problems. And they are led by a bunch of people who have decided that the lawbreakers are the good guys and the good guys are the lawbreakers. And so you're only going to get more of this. Let me start with this. It is, to a degree, old news. We've heard the story before about Rotherham in England. What we did not know until now is not only was this happening, and for those of you who don't know, at the time, they were called grooming gangs. Groups of Muslim men who insisted that because of their religious beliefs, they were allowed to groom young girls, many of whom were white girls from the community, and have sex with them. What we now know is that these were rape gangs, organized rape gangs, raping young women. In one case, the Muslim men plied, and this is important because remember, Muslims don't drink. The Muslim men got the young, and I mean like 15, 16-year-old white girls drunk and then gang raped them. And the police arrested the girls for underage drinking. Now, if that sounds wild to you, it should. It's the truth. It is the truth. It did happen. But progressives in this country and in the United Kingdom are refusing to believe the story because the story is being told by people on the right who they disagree with. In fact, Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and he is taking that position, essentially. This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth, and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts.
Now, the true facts are pretty horrific, and what you got to understand is that he was, for a time, the director of public prosecutions. Keir Starmer was the head of public prosecutions for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, at the time in Her Majesty's service, and turned a blind eye. In fact, here's what we know. The police in Rotherham, England, and in several other communities knew what was happening and covered up what was happening because they did not want to inflame multicultural, multiracial tension. Let me just read you this. Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips' decision to block a public inquiry into the Oldham grooming gangs, and really they're rape gangs, from the outside to be almost inexplicable. Children were raped and abused by gangs of men while the authorities failed to protect them. A review of the abuse in Oldham was released in 2022, but its terms of reference only stretched from 2011 to 2014. Survivors from the town said they wanted a government-led inquiry to cover a longer period and catch what the previous review had missed. In Jess Phillips' cover to the letter to the council, revealed by GB News, she said she understood the strength of feelings in the town, but thought it best for another public review to take place. This is a scandal that should be rooted out entirely and investigated by the full might of the British state. Voices ranging from Elon Musk and Kimi Badenoch have joined the calls for another inquiry, yet the government is reluctant to dig into the failings of officials. The reluctance is not new. Across the country, in towns and in cities, on our streets, and in the state institutions designed to protect the most vulnerable members of our society, authorities deliberately turned a blind eye to horrific abuse of largely white children by gangs of men predominantly of Pakistani heritage. Over time, details have come to light about abuse in Rotherham, in Telford, in Rochdale, and in dozens of other places. But with the stories released in dribs and drabs and the details so horrific as to be almost unreadable, the full scale of the scandal has yet to reach the public. The following paragraph makes for difficult reading, but you should read it if you can. It's drawn from Judge Peter Rook's 2013 sentencing of Muhammad Karar in Oxford. Muhammad prepared his victim for gang rape by using a pump. It was not, well, the rear. It was, You subjected her to a gang rape by 5 or 6 men. At one point, she had 4 men at one time, and a red ball was placed in her mouth to keep her quiet. Another girl, age 14, made repeated reports of rape, abuse, and coercion. When she, quote-unquote, married her abuser in a traditional Islamic wedding, her social worker attended the ceremony. The authorities then arranged for her to be fostered by her husband's parents. In Telford, Lucy Lowe died at 16 alongside her mother and sister when her abuser set fire to her home. She had given birth to Azhar Ali Mahmoud's child when she was 14 and was pregnant when she was killed. Her death was subsequently used to threaten other children. The Telford inquiry found particularly brutal threats when one victim, aged 12, told her mother, and the mother called the police. There were about 6 or 7 Asian men who came to my house. They threatened my mom, saying they'd petrol bomb my house if we don't drop the charges. And it was a pattern that repeated itself. Telford's authorities looked the other way. When an independent review was finally published in 2022, it found police officers described parts of the town as a no-go area, while witnesses set out multiple allegations of police corruption and favoritism toward the Pakistani community. Regardless of the reason, the inquiry found that there was nervousness about race, bordering on a reluctance to investigate crimes committed by what was described as an Asian community, mostly Pakistani Muslim men. Now, the council, you have to understand, is like the town council, the city council. Similar concerns appeared at the council. This I'm reading from the London Telegraph, where anxieties over appearing racist saw safeguarding officers waving away concerns simply because the perpetrators were Asian. It was felt that some suspects were not investigated because it would have been politically incorrect. That's not to say the council did nothing. Aware that taxi drivers were offering children rides for sex, in 2006 it suspended licensing enforcement for drivers, allowing high-risk drivers to continue practicing. As the Telford inquiry found, this was born entirely out of fear of accusations of racism. It was craven. Now, I'm going to stop reading here. And I just need you to know that in a single town, Telford, England, 1,000 girls were abused between 1980 and the year 2009. Some say it was higher than that. At the time, most people dismissed it as a conspiracy theory. It wasn't Asian men, it was Pakistani men. They were targeting white kids. And in fact, the data shows that the local governments and the police covered it up, refused to hear about it or do anything about it because they did not want to inflame racial tensions. The children had to be abused to keep society peaceful. In Rotherham, England, we now know that this has still been happening. A senior police officer told a father the town would erupt if the routine abuse of white children by Pakistani men were public knowledge. This is what happens when a society loses its way and is grounded in moral relativity. When there's not a right and a wrong anymore, when right and wrong are decided by majority will and not by God Almighty himself, you get this. We think of England because of jolly old England and the split between the Catholic Church and Henry VIII and all that. We think of it as a Christian island. It's not. It's post-Christian. Only about 4% of the entire country is churched. And in a country where there are no moral values anymore, everything is morally relative, you get this. This is the same sort of moral relativism you get in New York City, where a Daniel Penny can save people from being attacked by a crazy man, and Daniel Penny is charged with a crime. This is the same sort of moral relativity you get in the streets and subways of New York City, where a homeless man who is an illegal alien can burn a woman alive, and the people pull out their cell phones and record it instead of stopping it. This is what you get from the failures of Western society that has decided that it is too good for God. You get the devil himself. That's what's going on here. And it is pervasive in Great Britain. And it happened under conservative governments, and it happened under labor governments. And it turns out that one of the prosecutors involved in turning a blind eye is the current Prime Minister of Great Britain, who is now claiming that anyone who tells the truth is just a far-right extremist because he doesn't want to be held accountable for what he might have known or covered up. This is a collapsed society. A society that cannot take care of its children or treats its children as pawns in a multicultural battle for peace is a society that has already fallen and is collapsed. And we risk it happening here if we are unwilling to stand up for what's right. And what's right is not what the mob says. There is no moral relativism. There is right and there is wrong. And the fact that the police and the government in Great Britain couldn't tell the difference between the two probably means it's time for a great reset in Great Britain. And that reset should come with accountability for the Prime Minister. What did he know? When did he know it? And why did he say nothing? You got to start somewhere. So, I got to tell you, first of all, I have decided we need to stop calling it tort reform because nobody knows what a tort is unless you went to law school. So call it ambulance chasing reform. And we do need ambulance chasing reform because one of the issues in healthcare costs is the litigation costs. In fact, I am aware of a situation that happened just last week to a friend of mine who there are a couple of situations that happened last week with friends of mine who work in labor and delivery, but I got a friend of mine who works at a hospital in Washington, D.C., and the baby died, and it was a tragedy, and the baby died, and it is a situation where it is very clearly that the mother was addicted to drugs and had probably done drugs, which induced labor, and the child was born and died. And there's already a lawsuit, and in some states, Mississippi is an example of this. We're on the radio now in Mississippi. A lot of OBGYNs have been chased out of the state because insurance is so high now. It's become a problem. The ambulance chasers need to be reformed. Morgan & Morgan billboards are like a virus. When you start seeing Morgan & Morgan billboards in your community, it is the virus of the ambulance chasers, and those billboards chase the ambulances up the interstate from Florida to where I am, where you are. I was in Las Vegas, saw Morgan & Morgan billboards in Las Vegas. There's got to be ambulance chasing reform in this country. It is driving up costs for healthcare providers, driving up your costs. In my state, businesses are having a harder and harder time getting insurance in Georgia because of the ambulance chasers. We got to have ambulance chaser reform. We've got to rein this abuse in. It's driving up everybody's costs. Now, I got to tell you about my Eden Pure Thunderstorm. Those of you who are new to this show, I am a big believer in the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. I use one. I keep one in my travel bag. Jeff, one of the engineers in my office, I think I'm going to have to surrender my Eden Pure to him. He keeps asking for me to get him one. And I got one. I don't want to go buy one, so I got to give him one. And I've got this Eden Pure Thunderstorm, and it wipes out odors. And it doesn't only wipe out odors. It wipes out bacteria and viruses. 99.9% of bacteria and viruses eliminates them. It eliminates pet dander. It eliminates pollen. It eliminates dust. But what it does, what it's a genius at doing, is it generates ozone, and ozone particles latch onto odor particles and wipe them out. You get 3 of them and save $200 at EdenPureDeals.com. Eden like the Garden of Eden, pure as the driven snow, EdenPureDeals.com. Put in the discount code ERICK3, ERICK3 at EdenPureDeals.com. You'll get 3 of them for less than $200. Save $200 at EdenPureDeals.com. Hello there. Welcome back. It's Erick Erickson here across the nation. I want to welcome all of those of you who are new to the program. The phone number is 877-973-7425. You can text Erick, ERICK, to 33777. You can get the link to the show notes, the live stream, the podcast, the social media feeds, all you need to stay in touch and keep up with the program. I want to kind of go full circle because there are things we need to review that have happened. There is some breaking news you need to know. One, the results for the presidential election have been certified by Congress. Kamala Harris overseeing the Senate vote to certify the election for Donald Trump, who officially has been certified and will, of course, be sworn in on January 20th. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, has quit pending selection of a new Liberal Party leader. He is rendered the butt of jokes by Donald Trump. And also, you do need to resign as Prime Minister to run as Governor of Canada. So, nonetheless, I want to go full circle, though, into some stories that were not reported. And now, suddenly, you should ask yourself why they're being reported. This is the headline from the Associated Press. U.S. homelessness up 18% as affordable housing remains out of reach for many people. The first thing I want you to note about this story is they're using homeless again. And homelessness, not unhoused and unhousedness. Homelessness. It's back. The other thing is to remind you of the great Rush Limbaugh, who once said that homelessness is only an issue when Republicans take back the White House and then the media cares. And that is the case here. Listen to this story as reported by the Associated Press. The United States saw an 18.1% increase in homelessness this year in 2024, a dramatic rise driven mostly by lack of affordable housing, as well as devastating natural disasters and a surge of migrants in parts of the country, federal officials said. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development said federally required tallies taken across the country in January. The story's from December, so it was in January that 770,000 people were counted as homeless, a number that misses some people and does not include those staying with friends or family because they don't have a place of their own. That increase comes on top of a 12% increase in 2023 when the Housing and Urban Development blamed on soaring rents and the end of pandemic assistance. The 2023 increase also was driven by people experiencing homelessness for the first time. The numbers overall represent 23 out of every 10,000 people in the United States, with black people overrepresented among the homeless population. Among the most concerning trends, now you got to listen to this. You've got to listen. This is the big paragraph. Among the most concerning trends was a nearly 40% rise in family homelessness, one of the areas that was most affected by the arrival of migrants in big cities. Family homelessness more than doubled in 13 communities impacted by migrants, including Denver, Chicago, and New York City, according to Housing and Urban Development, while it rose less than 8% in the remaining 373 communities. Nearly 150,000 children experienced homelessness on a single night in 2024, reflecting a 33% jump from last year. Disasters also played a role in the rise, including last year's catastrophic Maui wildfire, the deadliest U.S. wildfire in a century. More than 5,200 people were staying in emergency shelters in Hawaii on the night of the count. You know what the Associated Press dances around? It's not the illegal immigrants who are the homeless people. It's the Americans. Yeah. Now, it's true there are some illegal aliens who are homeless. But because cities like Chicago, Denver, and New York City have prioritized finding places for all the illegal immigrants, it's the natives who don't have places to stay. They have, in the name of loving their neighbor, hated their neighbor so that they could love the illegal immigrant. It's wild to see the media suddenly now telling the truth. Now, we've known this. We've known this. We've known that illegal immigrant populations were taking over government benefits, government resources. Springfield, Ohio is an example. New York City is an example. Detroit, Denver, Chicago. And they want to make these places sanctuary cities. Now, I will tell you there is a silver lining in the homelessness data. Homelessness among veterans dropped 8%. And that's good. Unsheltered veterans dropped 11%. Now, what is the difference? A homeless veteran is someone who may be staying in a homeless shelter, and that's down 8%. An unsheltered veteran is a homeless veteran who lives on the streets, and they're down 11%. There has been actually a lot of bipartisan support to deal with the issue of homeless veterans and their mental health issues, and that's good. But notice the data comes from the beginning of 2024, and they didn't tell the story until the end of 2024. Why? Because of the election. The New York Times had a story out on Friday that the Biden administration in the third quarter of 2023 was able to curtail illegal immigration at the southern and northern borders. In fact, they heralded it as a success. Notice the media is reporting it now, after the election, and that it only became an issue in the third quarter. August, September, October. What August, September, July, August, September. July, August, September. That's the third quarter. July, August, September. October, November, December, fourth quarter. July, August, September, third quarter. Right about the time the general election was kicked off and Joe Biden was still thinking of running again for president. Then Kamala Harris became the nominee. So only then in the general election, when it's a campaign issue, does the Biden administration decide to implement rules and regulations that forced the slowdown of illegal border crossings. They waited until then. They could have done it at the beginning of his tenure in office. They could have done it halfway through his tenure in office. They waited until the third quarter of the presidential election year to do it. And somehow we're supposed to commend Joe Biden, as opposed to wondering why they waited. Just remarkable that they waited this whole time to tell us. It's remarkable they decided to only do it now. The other thing they did is they have heralded, the media has, the retirement or resignation of the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. He's a presidential pick, oversees law enforcement in the District of Columbia. He's resigned. CBS News wants you to know there's been a 52% decrease in crime. 52%. Here's the thing. I know a lot of people in Washington, D.C. In fact, a lot of people in Washington, D.C. listen to this program. I'm not on a radio station there, but I live stream, and I have right now, hang on, I can tell you. Right now, listening to me live in Washington, the Washington, D.C. metro area, which is like Forest, D.C., all the way over towards the Silver Springs, Maryland. So I've got 824 people listening right now in the metro D.C. area. Do any of you people listening, you 824 people listening right now, do any of you feel safer in Washington, D.C.? Carjackings are up in Washington, D.C. Gang violence is up in Washington, D.C. Shootings are up in Washington, D.C. So how is it there's been a 52% drop in crime in Washington, D.C.? Because the prosecutor who the media heralded for cutting crime didn't prosecute crime. Is that not the most remarkable thing? By refusing to prosecute crimes, you can say crime dropped. You didn't get convictions and people stopped calling the police. And when you don't get convictions and people stop calling the police, people stop reporting crimes because they know that this is going to happen. So you can say, look at that, crime has gone down. Behold the miracle of not calling and reporting the crime. Look from this situation to England. You did not have an outbreak of rapes in the United Kingdom. In fact, in many of those cities, Rotherham, England as well, the number of rapes reported was actually incredibly low per capita. It was happening. The rapings were happening. It's just the police took a hear no evil, see no evil, do no evil approach. You don't see it. You don't hear it. You don't do anything about it. It doesn't count. The rape is a rape, but it doesn't count. Rape percentages low per capita in Rotherham, England, despite all the white girls getting raped by Pakistani men. Because nobody reported it. Same in the District of Columbia. There are carjackings, there are robberies, there are home break-ins, there are murders, there is gang violence, there are psychotic homeless people on the side of the road attacking people, but it doesn't count because it's not reported. This guy was a genius. 52% drop in crime. That's how they want to report it. Here's the sad reality. In the last year, Gallup, which has done far-reaching, trending polling on public opinions, Gallup has surveyed the American public for decades. And public trust in the media is now beneath public trust in Congress. Public trust in the media, fewer people trust reporters than they do their members of Congress. Think about that. That's like trusting the crackhead instead of the clergyman. Fewer people trust the reporters than trust the members of Congress. Why? Because they see it with their own eyes every day. They know that there's crime in Washington and New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, and the media tells us crime has fallen. People have known forever that Joe Biden was a dementia patient, and only now that the election is over and Trump is going to win, now the media says, oh, people have known Joe Biden had mental issues since 2021, if not before. Well, we all knew. It's you guys who covered for him. Y'all are the ones who lied. And remember, if you will, the media. When Republicans insisted it was very likely with all the illegal immigrants who have come into this country that some of them are terrorists, some of them are mean as harm. And the media during the election denied it. This is Representative Mike Turner from the House Intelligence Committee on Face the Nation this weekend with Margaret Brennan, one of the people who lectured us about there's no proof about these terrorists coming into this country. Well, suddenly the audio has died on me. That's okay. Mike Turner went on Face the Nation and said that actually there's a growing body of evidence that we do have terrorists in this country. Let me see if I can pull up the audio this way for you so you can hear it and you don't have to take my word for it. There actually is a lot of evidence about terrorists in this country.
I think the issue of cells, and you and I were talking about that at the beginning of the show, are there individuals that are affiliated with ISIS and terrorist groups and organizations that have crossed the border and they're inside the United States? Director Wray, FBI director, has said so. We certainly have intelligence that says so. I agree with his assessment. Jim has also seen it. He's testified before our committee publicly of that fact. Those individuals are working in conjunction with ISIS with the intention of harming Americans. The director has said it directly.
They are known to U.S. intelligence and law enforcement.
And we are working diligently to try to take them down, to prevent them from doing so. And that's why the director is publicly saying such. And that's what the new administration is going to be handed. The fact that these individuals are here, that we need to locate them, we need to remove them, we need to bring them to justice and prevent them from doing harm to Americans.
That's Mike Turner, Congressman. What he said was a hugely controversial thing before the election, even though the FBI director had said it before the election. It was hugely controversial, and any Republican who dared say it was assailed, including by Margaret Brennan. And now he's on saying the same thing. Nothing has changed, and suddenly they're willing to talk about it. The media did their best to cover for Joe Biden and the Democrats, and now they feel like they don't have to. And in the process, they're destroying their own credibility. They deserve to be put out of business.